NFL free agency is less than 30 days away, which is why you have to be subscribed. That way you don't miss a single thing when it comes to Browns free agency news, rumors, or buzz. We're going to keep you tapped in here at the channel. We are officially under 30 days away from free agency opening up, with the new league year starting on March 15th and legal tampering starting as soon as March 13th. So I figured kind of those 30 under 30, 40 under 40, those Forbes list or whatever, we would do 30 free agents for less than 30 days away to kind of kickstart the free agency buzz, because that's going to be the major topic for the next month or 2 months or so. Now, the Browns' biggest needs, before we look at any names, I've got them ranked 1 through 5. I think the biggest need is defensive tackle. I've got defensive end at 2. You could argue and swap it with wide receiver. I just think you have to hit on 1 or 2. If you get 1, then wide receiver probably bumps up to number 2. Linebackers at 4. They only have 3 guys currently rostered at the linebacker position: JOK, Tony Fields, and Jacob Phillips. And then safety comes in at 5. I like Grant Delpit a lot. I'm becoming a big Grant Delpit fan. I think he can hold down the ship if they don't go out and get an expensive free agent. But it is 5 on the list. And the projected cap space for the Browns, by the way, in the neighborhood of $35 million. That number is going to be fluid as Andrew Berry restructures some contracts and releases some players. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Starting in order at defensive tackles, it's so important. I've got 10 names at this spot. Number 1 on my wish list is Daron Payne. Pretty much like everyone else, Daron Payne is the coveted free agent defensive tackle this year. All 32 teams are talking about Daron Payne. I expect the Commanders, I shouldn't say expect, because I don't want to give them any ideas if they're not already thinking about it, but don't be surprised if they franchise tag him. So with that, my number 2 is very important, and I've actually shaked this up a little bit. It's Tuttle from the New Orleans Saints. I moved him to 2 because I'm trying to find a balance of what I want versus what I think Andrew Berry will do. And Tuttle is not going to be an extremely expensive free agent, and I think he's a solid player. We'll look at some stats of these guys in just a second. Dalvin Tomlinson quietly put together an awesome year last season for Minnesota. Former second-round pick for the G-Men. He comes in at 3 ahead of Javon Hargrave. I'm just prioritizing run stoppers, and Tomlinson's better at it than Hargrave. I like Hargrave, but the age is a bit of a factor that kind of tips the scales in favor of Tomlinson. There's Teair Tart. He's a restricted free agent, which doesn't put him in the same category as everyone else. The Browns would have to match the salary that the Tennessee Titans offer, but I do like Teair Tart. Plus Jim Schwartz, coming from Tennessee, he might know a thing or two about Tart, to say the least, and might want to bring him along with him. Aside from Daron Payne, who's your top defensive tackle free agent? Let me know in the comment section below. This is the pinned comment, so if YouTube sticks an ad break when I'm done talking, take advantage of it and get your replies down below with one of the names we've looked at or someone else. Now, we all know how great Daron Payne is. So if we're looking at the other 4 guys, because if Daron Payne is on the market, they should go get him. But look at the stats right now of the other 4 players here. Tuttle, 49 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 2 sacks. We all know that defensive tackle stats sometimes go a bit under the radar, a bit underappreciated if you don't rack up the sack column. But I'm not necessarily looking for a defensive tackle who can give me some pass rush. Daron Payne and Javon Hargrave, they definitely offer that, but they also do help in the run department. But the other 3 guys, Tuttle, Tomlinson, and Tart, are excellent run stoppers, run defenders, and they're not going to cost as much as Javon Hargrave or Daron Payne would. So those are some sneaky guys to keep an eye on for. Now, when it comes to one in particular, Dalvin Tomlinson. He, according to Spotrac, is projected to get 3 years, $25 million in free agency. That comes out to an average of $8.5 million per season. If Daron Payne gets tagged, Hargrave goes back to Philly, but Andrew Berry decides, I do want to go get a more expensive free agent defensive tackle. Tomlinson, projected to get $8.5 million, might end up being a bit more. Could be right in the wheelhouse for Andrew Berry. Moving on to 6 through 10, I just think it's such an important position. I had to add in 5 extra names. Sheldon Rankins for the Jets was a low-key, really good player. The Jets' defense was really good last season. That's not new information. It just got swept under the rug because the offense was so bad. Now, what about this familiar name right there, Andrew Billings? Remember, he was on the Browns last season after starting his career in Cincinnati. He only played in like 6 games for Cleveland back in 2021. Practice squad guy, elevating up and down, really not much of a factor at all. Billings, though, for the Raiders this year, was really good. Greg Gaines is an interesting name to keep an eye on. He's gotten better each year, the former 4th-round pick out of Washington. I've just not been a huge Greg Gaines guy because he doesn't offer fantastic run-stopping abilities, and his pass rush doesn't make up for it, in my opinion. Then there's Khalen Saunders next up. Now, the Chiefs are coming off a Super Bowl victory, and maybe they decide they don't have the money to spend at backup defensive tackles. The 26-year-old was a rotational piece for Kansas City this year, and Saunders could be a name to watch for. And then finally, a bit older in the age column, but he's coming off a really strong season. That's the New Orleans Saints defensive tackle, David Onyemata. I like Onyemata. I don't love Onyemata. Now, if I had to pick a sleeper, what about Andrew Billings, like we just talked about? He knows the system-ish. It's a new DC, but he knows at least where to park and where Berea is. And you often see teams bring back guys who have been with the program just so they don't have to completely catch them up to speed. And Billings this past season for the Raiders, 39 tackles, a sack, 3 tackles for loss. He went to Vegas as a very small signing. They probably didn't expect much out of him. He ended up starting for them. So Billings could be a name to watch for. Switching gears here, let's talk defensive ends now. Now, I've got him ranked 1 through 5 once again. And a bit of a surprise here, I think, but I've got Zach Allen from the Arizona Cardinals coming in at number 1. I'm a big Zach Allen fan. He ended the season on a bit of an injury, so didn't get to see a full slate of games out of him. But Zach Allen, I know the Cardinals will love to bring back. Arizona is sort of in a bit of a rebuild right now, and maybe they decide, let's not sink our money in free agency when we're not really ready to win right now despite having Kyler Murray, so that feels backwards. But Zach Allen, I think, is a really strong candidate. Plus, he's not going to break the bank. I know everyone wants Dre'Mont Jones, the Cleveland native. I've got him at 2. I like Dre'Mont Jones. I think he'd be a really good signing for the Browns, or really any team for that matter. I just prefer Allen over him. DeMarcus Walker is next. He was a guy who just hopped around the league, and then he got the benefit of working under Jim Schwartz in 2022 because he popped off for 7 sacks, and that was a career high. Another player who has a great pass rush season when Jim Schwartz is standing on the sideline. Moving on here, Samson Ebukam, the 49ers defensive end. The Niners defense was loaded with studs, not duds. And Ebukam kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. He was only used in rotations, obvious passing situations. But when he was on the field, he definitely had an impact on the game. So he could be in line for a bigger workload. And at Cleveland right now, I'm not really sold on Alex Wright after his rookie season being the presumptive starter opposite of Myles Garrett. So maybe they go by committee for the opposite defensive end position. Coming in at number 5 is Yannick Ngakoue. It's not because I think these other guys are better than Yannick Ngakoue. No, Yannick Ngakoue is better than them. I just don't think the Browns are honestly going to sink a ton of money into this position. So this is where it comes into that balance of what I want versus what I think Andrew Berry will do. And Ngakoue at 5 is because I don't think Berry is ready to invest a ton of money at the opposite defensive end spot. I think he'd rather go a little bit cheaper and rely on Myles Garrett to carry the workload. Now, the name that everyone's talking about, at least in the last month or so, is Dre'Mont Jones for the Denver Broncos. He has been rock solid since he came into the league. 3rd-round pick out of Ohio State, of course. The last 3 seasons, consistent right there. 6.5, 5.5, 6.5 sack seasons. So Jones would be a very consistent player. Plus, he's done all that with a backup role, more or less. He was behind Von Miller and Bradley Chubb for a stretch. Then Von Miller gets traded. So now he's behind Randy Gregory, right? And then Bradley Chubb got traded. So now he's more of a starting role. Well, he was starting at the 5 technique. So the starting element wasn't there. But in terms of the you know, importance and his role as a pass rusher, I think, improved when there was no Von Miller or Bradley Chubb. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. All right, some other names to keep an eye on for defensive ends. Look at the stats of the guys we mentioned earlier. Zach Allen, DeMarcus Walker, Samson Ebukam. Allen only played in 13 games but had 6 sacks. He got better as the season went along for his career, as a matter of fact. Same for Walker, a player that sort of just bounced around a little bit, and then he found a home in Tennessee last year when Harold Landry went down, and he was someone who really thrived under Jim Schwartz. Let's talk wide receivers next here on the show. This is not a very lucrative group, if you ask me. I've got Mecole Hardman at number 1. He's got the young age factor at 24. He's got the blazing speed that this Browns receiving core desperately needs, and you have probably heard now for, 7,500 times. Parris Campbell is another interesting name to watch for. Maybe a bit of a homecoming, of course. Former second-round pick out of Ohio State. And Campbell, last year under the Colts, somewhat broke out after a very poor start to his career and a putrid Indianapolis Colts offense. I like Jakobi Meyers more than the other two. I just think Meyers is going to catch more money in free agency, and that's why I've got him at 3, because I don't think the Browns are able to afford him. Unless they're desperate to get a wide receiver, I'm guessing that they don't splurge too much at wide receiver. I'll expand on that thought in just a moment. Some other names here. Darius Slayton. I probably should have a bit higher. He was the Giants' best receiver this year, which says a lot, but also talks about how bad the Giants' receiving core was. Slayton, I doubt, is going to go back to New York, so that could be a slot name to watch for. He's always had an issue with the drops, which is why I feel like if I advocate for signing him and then he goes out and drops a key pass, everyone's going to come back and blame me. I like Slayton, don't love Slayton. And then finally at number 5, Allen Lazard. I'm not a huge Lazard guy. I don't think it's a hot take to say he's probably benefited from having back-to-back MVP quarterback seasons out of Aaron Rodgers. He also doesn't really fit with the Browns' need at wide receiver. But I've got him on the list because there's really no one else. It is not a very good wide receiver list for free agency this year. So we're going to look at some stats now of some of these guys in particular, because the top 2 I mentioned, Mecole Hardman and Parris Campbell, when you look at their career stats, it's Hardman kind of by a mile, but Campbell really made the most of a contract year for Indianapolis in 2021 or 2022. Of those 983 yards, I mean, most of them, I think 600 or so, came in 2022. Hardman, on the other hand, I don't think ever really reached the expectations the Chiefs had for him. But we know with Patrick Mahomes, if your name isn't Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill, maybe he doesn't look your way all that often. I'm not anticipating at the end of the day a very expensive move at wide receiver in free agency for the Browns. I just think with the limited bullets in the chamber that they have, 35 max, it might not even be that much money to spend. They're not going to divulge it at wide receiver when they're already paying Amari Cooper $20 million. They got DPJ rising the ranks. They drafted David Bell in the 3rd round last year. Oh, and I forgot, they kind of gave Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed to elevate wide receivers, right? Not to have to go out and buy even more expensive wide receivers. Now let's talk linebackers here. My number 1 and 2 are Anthony Walker and Taki Taki. I just think the Browns are looking to bring one of those 2 guys back. So that's why I've got them at 1 and 2, because I think there is a more than 50% chance that one of those 2 players comes back next year. Which one? Your guess could be as good as mine. I'm leaning more towards Walker. 1, when Walker went down in week 3, it really felt like the air went out on that defense. 2, Taki ACL injury later in the season. Could be ready come week 1 or week 2, but maybe not. Whereas Walker got injured, unfortunately, earlier in the year, so he could be ready to go come training camp. Some other linebackers to watch out for. Azeez Al-Shaair. Again, when you play in the shadow of Fred Warner, you don't get a lot of recognition, but I think he's one of the better off-ball linebackers in football that's going to get more notoriety if he signs elsewhere in free agency. gets a starting role and gets a more prominent role in that defense. Rashaan Evans for the Falcons last year was rock solid. He was good. The only reason he's probably not going back to Atlanta is because he's a bit older in the age column now at 27, and I think the Falcons kind of want to let their young bucks get a full run in, kind of like why they traded Dre'Mont Jones. Then at number 5 is Lavonte David. He's 33. He was one of the 5 best linebackers in football last season. If Lavonte David doesn't get any calls in free agency, which we often see the older veterans sometimes fall off people's radars, everyone assumes they're washed. Well, if Lavonte David is interested in coming to Cleveland and really help establish a leadership role on this team, which this defense needs, sign me up. I'm all in. When Bobby Wagner got cut by the Seahawks last year, I kind of thought maybe Wagner's best days were behind him. You could argue one of his best seasons of his entire NFL career was this past season with the LA Rams. But one guy to watch out in particular is Anthony Walker. It really felt like things started to spiral out of control defensively when he went down against Pittsburgh in week 3. And for that reason, I think Andrew Berry would be smart, and he's a smart dude, is probably thinking long and hard about maybe we should bring back Walker. He's just such an important leader on this team in just 2 short seasons. You don't have to see that. But Walker, I think, would be a big candidate to come back and watch for. All right, some other stats to kind of throw your way, though. Like I talked about, Lavonte David. At 33, 124 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble. He was a top 5 linebacker in football last year. So if no other team comes barking up his tree and the Browns can get him a cheap 1-year deal, yeah, I'm in. Now, let me know what you guys want to do in free agency. Who do you want the Browns to sign? Give me a name that you like out there on the market, and I'll check them out if I haven't already. Let's switch gears and let's talk safeties now. Surprise, surprise. Actually surprise, too. That was sarcastic, but it wasn't meant to be. Jimmy Ward is at number 1. Why do I have Jimmy Ward at number 1? Jimmy Ward is a former first-round pick that's got experience at free safety, and this year for the 49ers, he dabbled in that nickel slot corner position. I could think of a team in Northeast Ohio that needs some help at that spot, especially if Greg Newsome doesn't want to go back and play there. So Jimmy Ward could kind of check 2 boxes for the Browns. The former first-round pick out of NIU, I've always been a big fan of. Julian Love I've got at 2 because I just don't see the Browns breaking the bank for a safety. Jesse Bates is all the way at 5. Why? Not because I don't want to sign him. He's the best safety on screen right now. I just don't see the Browns investing $20 million into a safety when they see Grant Delpit really starting to surge while he's still on his rookie contract. At the end of the day, I just don't see Andrew Berry getting it done for him. Amos and Jabril Peppers. What about a homecoming for Jabril? That would be pretty sweet. After rupturing his Achilles with the Giants in his last year in New York, went to New England this past year and had a pretty low-key, solid season. So, to look at my list one more time, I like Jimmy Ward because of the flexibility he offers you. Julian Love is due for a decent payday. Not as expensive as Jesse Bates, but still pretty good. Amos will be going to his 3rd team, so maybe you can get him on a bit of a discount towards the end of his career, but he's been one of the more consistent safeties in football since he came into the league out of Penn State. Jabril Peppers, I'm just all for the homecoming. That's really why he's on the list more than anything else. But like I said, Jimmy Ward is my guy to really start to keep an eye on, especially at the Niners, which have a lot of mouths to feed. They got to pay Brandon Ayuk soon. They're still riding the high of not having to pay a quarterback, with Trey Lance and Brock Purdy being on their rookie deals. But they probably are going to have to let Ward walk in free agency because they'll be outpriced. And if the Browns want to throw, I don't know, $9 or so million a season Ward's way, I'm not going to argue against it. Before we go, you guys know the drill. End of the video, crew. Shout out to everyone still watching right now. Now, for today's random Cleveland Browns player, I thought it would be only fitting to do someone at a position of need, and it's one of my favorites. It's Andrew Hawkins, the wide receiver from 2014 to 2016. When I pulled up his Wikipedia just to kind of refresh myself about him, completely forgot he started his career in the CFL and won 2 Grey Cups. So that's pretty cool. Andrew Hawkins, you are our random player coming in from Nolan Bagel. How do you like your bagels? Let me know in the comment section.